Ambassador Kovacs stood motionless on the bridge of the eternal light, his iridescent scales shifting from their usual confident gold to an uncertain blue-green. After 3 centuries of first contact missions, he had thought nothing could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. Ambassador, croaked junior analyst Cyril from the deck, their neural interface still smoking slightly. The readings, they don't make sense. They can't make sense. Kovacs gestured to the medical team, who rushed to attend to the fallen analyst. The young Zaxthari's neural overload was concerning, but what worried Kovacs more was what had caused it. He turned to face the main view screen, studying the deceptively simple vessels that orbited the blue-green world before them. "Show me the sensor logs," he commanded, his secondary hearts beginning to beat faster. Raw data only. The holographic display materialized before him, showing what appeared to be absurdly primitive spacecraft. Radio waves, chemical propulsion, and metal hulls that wouldn't withstand a single shot from even their most basic weapons. It was exactly what they'd expected to find after detecting the planet's broadcasts. Exactly what they'd prepared for. Too exactly. "Supreme Commander Erxtal," Kovacs called out, his voice carefully controlled. "Would you join me for a moment?" The imposing military leader strode forward, her battle-scarred scales a deep crimson of barely contained aggression. "Ambassador, we're wasting time. These primitives barely have orbital capabilities. Standard protocol dictates. Look at this energy reading." Kovacs interrupted, zooming in on a particular data stream. "What do you see?" Erxtal's scales flickered in annoyance, then shifted to pale yellow, surprise. "That's impossible. The pattern is too perfect." "Precisely." Kovacs manipulated the display, overlaying multiple sensor readings. "Every reading we're getting is exactly what we'd expect from a developing spacefaring race. Not a single deviation. Not one anomaly. In 300 years of first contact missions, I've never seen anything so perfect." A sudden burst of static filled the bridge's speakers. The human vessels had noticed them. "Incoming transmission," announced the communications officer. "It's primitive radio waves, Ambassador, just as we expected." Kovacs's scales rippled with dark purple, deep worry. "Too perfect," he whispered. Then louder, "Play the transmission." "Greetings, unknown vessels. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Ship Nightingale. We come in peace and welcome peaceful contact." The voice was clear, professional, and spoke in perfect galactic standard, a language that, according to their intelligence, Earth shouldn't have even known existed. Erxtal's scales flushed deep red again. "It's a trap." "No," Kovacs cut her off. "Not a trap. A test." He stepped closer to the view screen, studying what appeared to be a simple medical vessel. Its hull was scratched, its paint faded, its design utterly utilitarian. Yet something about it made his ancestral instincts scream danger. "They're testing how we'll react," he continued. "Everything we're seeing is deliberate. They're showing us exactly what we expected to see. The question is, what are they hiding?" As if in answer, their sensors briefly glitched, just for a microsecond. And in that instant, Kovacs caught a glimpse of something else. Energy readings that defied physics, hull compositions that shouldn't exist, and power signatures that made their mighty diplomatic fleet look like children's toys. Then it was gone, replaced once again by the perfect facade of a primitive fleet. Kovacs turned to Erxtal, his scales now a mix of fascination and fear. "Supreme Commander, I believe we may need to reconsider our approach. We're not dealing with primitives. We're dealing with masters of deception. Your orders, Ambassador." "Send our response," Kovacs said, his scales settling into a determined purple gold. "And pray we haven't already made a terrible mistake in our assumptions." Lieutenant Sarah Chen's fingers hovered over the holographic controls of the UES Nightingale, her expression carefully neutral despite the sweat beading on her forehead. The ship's true combat interface lay dormant beneath the fake medical console, ready to activate at a moment's notice. "They're scanning us again," reported her XO, Commander James Rodriguez, his voice low. Third sweep in the last hour. These HFY are nothing if not thorough. Sarah nodded, maintaining the appearance of a somewhat nervous medical ship captain. Status of the masking systems. Holding perfectly. As far as they can tell, we're just a converted passenger liner with some basic medical equipment. James paused, checking another reading. Though their young officer, the one with the greenish scales, seems particularly interested in Bay 4. Sarah's jaw tightened. Bay 4 housed the Nightingale's quantum torpedo assembly, disguised as a regenerative medicine facility. The masking technology would hold, but the young alien's persistence was concerning. The bridge door hissed open, admitting their HFY guests. Ambassador Kovacs led the group, his scales shifting through subtle shades of blue and gold. Behind him, a younger officer, the persistent scanner, practically vibrated with barely contained excitement. Captain Chen, Kovacs' translator, produced perfect English. Thank you for hosting us. Junior Specialist Murix here is particularly interested in your medical capabilities. Of course, Sarah smiled, years of diplomatic training keeping her voice steady. Though I should warn you, our facilities are quite modest compared to your advanced technology. Murix's scales flickered with what Sarah's xenopsych training identified as barely suppressed smugness. Actually, Captain, I have some questions about the energy readings from your medical bay. They're unusual for healing equipment. Sarah caught James's subtle hand signal. The young alien had managed to detect something. Not enough to breach their cover, but enough to raise questions. Unusual. Sarah kept her tone curious but slightly worried. Exactly how a lesser-developed species should react. I hope there's nothing wrong with our equipment. We recently upgraded our diagnostic imaging systems, but the integration hasn't been entirely smooth. Murix moved closer to one of the medical displays, their scales now showing patterns of intense concentration. These power fluctuations, they're remarkably similar to what we'd expect from a controlled quantum reaction, not a medical scanner. Behind the alien delegation, James's hand slowly moved toward the hidden weapons release. Sarah caught his eye and gave a microscopic head shake. Not yet. Quantum reaction. Sarah let confusion color her voice. I'm afraid Earth's understanding of quantum mechanics is still quite basic. Our medical technology relies primarily on traditional imaging methods, magnetic resonance, radiation, sonic mapping. Ambassador Kovacs placed a restraining hand on Murix's shoulder, his scales showing embarrassment. My apologies, Captain. Murix is young and enthusiastic. Perhaps we could focus on more practical matters. But Murix wasn't done. If I could just run one detailed scan of Bay 4. Junior Specialist. Kovacs' voice carried an edge that transcended species barriers. You forget yourself. The younger alien's scales dulled to a chastised gray. My apologies, Ambassador. Captain. Sarah waved away the apology, even as she noted how Kovacs had intervened. The ambassador wasn't fooled by their deception. He was too experienced for that. But he was playing along, which meant he understood the dance for what it was. Would you like to see our primary care unit? Sarah offered, deliberately steering them away from Bay 4. We've recently updated our trauma response protocols. As she led the delegation through the ship's medical facilities, Sarah exchanged a knowing look with James. The HFY weren't as convinced of human technological inferiority as they pretended to be, and humans weren't as primitive as they appeared. It was, Sarah reflected, going to be an interesting diplomatic mission indeed. Supreme Commander Arkstel stood proudly on the command deck of the HFY flagship, the Eternal Dominion, her scales gleaming with anticipation. The vessel represented the pinnacle of their civilization's military might. 3 kilometers of advanced alloys and cutting-edge weaponry. Your attention, Earth representatives, she announced to the human delegation. We will now demonstrate the capabilities of our latest Mark VI and mural-linked combat system. Lieutenant Chen and her small group watched from the observation deck, their expressions appropriately awed. Yet Ensign David Kumar, the youngest of the human officers, seemed more interested in the neural interface panels than the massive weapon arrays being displayed. The system allows for instant response times, Arkstall continued, her scales rippling with pride. No other known civilization has achieved such perfect synchronization between ship and crew. David raised his hand, a gesture that made several Zaxthari officers' scales flicker with amusement at its childlike simplicity. Supreme Commander, may I ask a technical question? Arkstall's scales showed indulgent superiority. Of course, young one. Have you solved the quantum desynchronization problem in the neural pathway? The one that occurs when multiple operators access the same combat subsystem. The command deck fell silent. Arkstall's scales shifted from confident gold to surprised yellow so fast it must have been painful. How do you know about that? Demanded Mirix, who had been watching the humans like a hawk since the medical bay incident. David blinked innocently. Oh, it's just basic neural interface theory. We encountered similar issues in our early attempts at direct neural links. The quantum states collapse when. Early attempts. Mirix interrupted. Your species barely has spaceflight. You can't possibly have. A sudden alarm cut through the tension. A nearby asteroid, nearly invisible against the system's star, had altered course. It was now on a direct collision path with the assembled fleet. Impact in 30 seconds, a Zaxthari officer shouted. Neural interface loading. Loading. System crash. The quantum desynchronization. All ships, emergency maneuvers, Arkstall commanded, her scales now ash-gray with fear. The massive Eternal Dominion's engines flared, but the ship's bulk made it move with agonizing slowness. Then something impossible happened. The UES Nightingale, supposedly a converted medical ship, moved. Not with the clumsy chemical thrusters it had shown before, but with an elegant precision that defied physics. The vessel split into 3 distinct sections, each moving independently yet in perfect coordination. What in the name of the first egg? Mirix breathed. The Nightingale's sections surrounded the asteroid, and for a brief moment, reality itself seemed to bend. A gravitational lens formed between the 3 segments, and the asteroid simply ceased to exist, converted to harmless energy that dissipated into space. The human vessel reassembled itself, once again appearing as nothing more than a humble medical ship. Lieutenant Chen cleared her throat in the stunned silence. Supreme Commander, I believe this would be a good time to discuss the actual capabilities of Earth's fleet. Arkstall's scales had gone completely white, a sign of total shock in her species. That was not simple neural interface technology. No, David offered helpfully. We abandoned neural interfaces centuries ago. Too limiting. Our ships use quantum consciousness integration instead. The vessels aren't controlled by the crew. They're extensions of the crew. Ambassador Kovacs, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. You've been holding back. Significantly. Just as you have, Ambassador, Sarah replied with a diplomatic smile. Though I notice your ship's weapon systems have been quietly charging since we came aboard. Kovacs's scales showed a mix of embarrassment and respect. It seems we have much to learn from each other. Indeed, Sarah agreed. For instance, would you like to know how we actually solved that quantum desynchronization problem? It's quite elegant, really. As David launched into an enthusiastic technical explanation that had the Zaxthari engineer's scales changing colors rapidly, Sarah exchanged a knowing look with Kovacs. The real first contact was finally beginning. The asteroid field came alive without warning. What the sensors had dismissed as harmless space debris suddenly accelerated, becoming a deadly cloud of hypervelocity projectiles. The Zaxthari fleet's automated defenses sprang to life, but they were designed to track energy signatures, not chunks of inert rock. Multiple impacts detected. Mirix's scales had gone ghost white as she monitored the tactical display. Hull breach on decks 7 through 12 of the Eternal Dominion. Ambassador Kovacs watched in horror as emergency force fields failed to contain the decompressions. Our backup systems are offline. How did they know exactly where to? Permission to assist. Lieutenant Chen's voice cut through the chaos. Suddenly, all business. Supreme Commander Arxtel's scales showed internal conflict, pride warring with survival. Another impact rocked the flagship, deciding the matter. Granted. Sarah's fingers danced across her neural interface. Nightingale actual to all Earth vessels. Pattern Delta 7. Execute. The transformation was breathtaking. The small flotilla of seemingly primitive Earth ships rippled like liquid metal. The Nightingale split again, but differently this time, each section reconfiguring into sleek combat forms. Other vessels followed suit, their harmless civilian facades melting away to reveal deadly efficiency. By the first egg, Mirix whispered, they're not individual ships at all. They're components of a larger system. She was right. The Earth vessels moved in perfect synchronization, forming complex geometric patterns that somehow altered the local space-time geometry. Asteroids that should have impacted the Zaxtheri ships instead found themselves passing through empty space, their trajectories bent impossible degrees. Ensign Kumar, Sarah commanded, explain to our friends what they're seeing. They've earned that much. David nodded eagerly, pulling up a holographic display. Every human vessel is designed with quantum morphic architecture. We can reconfigure not just our ship's forms, but their fundamental physical properties. He highlighted the Nightingale's transformed sections. Right now, we're using crystalline pattern formation to generate localized gravity lenses. A massive asteroid, easily large enough to crack the Eternal Dominion in half, approached the fleet. The Earth ships responded by flowing into a new configuration, a perfect dodecahedron of transformed vessels. Watch this, David said with poorly concealed excitement. This is my favorite part. Energy coursed between the Earth ships, and for a moment, reality seemed to hiccup. The asteroid didn't explode or change course. It simply ceased to exist at point A and resumed existing at point B, safely past the fleet. Kovacs's scales had shifted to a deep blue of intellectual fascination. You've mastered localized temporal displacement. Among other things, Sarah admitted. Though we usually avoid showing off quite this much, the morphic reconfiguration tends to make other species nervous. Nervous? Mirix's scales showed a complex mix of fear and excitement. You've completely rewritten the laws of physics as we understand them. Not rewritten, David corrected. Just expanded our understanding of them. Though I'd be happy to share some of our basic theoretical frameworks. Your neural interface technology could benefit from. Another impact interrupted him. This time, a piece of debris had slipped through their defenses, tearing a massive hole in the Eternal Dominion's primary hull. Without hesitation, the Nightingale's medical section detached and flowed through space like liquid mercury, sealing itself against the breach. Its hull actually merged with the Zaxtheri vessel's structure, creating a perfect seal. That's not possible, Mirix breathed. Hull materials don't work that way. They do if you understand quantum morphic bonding, David replied cheerfully. Would you like me to explain the principles behind molecular restructuring at the quantum level? It's really quite fascinating. As the young ensign launched into another enthusiastic technical lecture, Sarah and Kovacs shared a knowing look. The Zaxtheri were beginning to understand that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology. It was their endless drive to push the boundaries of what was possible. The attack came without warning. 7 vessels dropped out of hyperspace, their hulls painted in the blood-red markings of the notorious Crimson Fang's pirate fleet. Their weapons were already charging, targeting both human and Zaxtheri ships alike. Well, Lieutenant Chen remarked calmly from the Nightingale's bridge, this should be educational. The pirate's leader, his face obscured by a fearsome combat mask, appeared on all communication channels. Zaxtheri vessels, Earth vessels, this is Captain Drakuth of the Crimson Fangs. Power down your. Sarah cut the transmission with a casual gesture. Nightingale Actual to Earth Fleet. Release Pattern Echo 9. Let's show our new friends how we handle uninvited guests. The transformation this time was different from the asteroid incident. Instead of combining into geometric patterns, the Earth vessels seemed to simply fade away. They're running. Mirix's scales flickered with disappointment from her position on the Eternal Dominion's bridge. After everything we've seen. There. Watch. Ambassador Kovacs interrupted, his scales showing intense concentration. Remember what we learned about human deception. The pirate fleet advanced confidently, their sensors detecting only the Zaxtheri ships and what appeared to be fleeing Earth vessels. Captain Drakuth's laugh boomed across the command channel he'd forced open. See, these humans are all show. Now, about our demands. The space behind the pirate fleet rippled. The Nightingale reappeared, but not as a medical ship or even as its previous combat form. Its hull had reconfigured into something that seemed to drink in light itself, its form barely visible except where it blocked out the stars. Other Earth vessels emerged from seemingly impossible angles, their transformed configurations defying conventional geometry. That's not stealth technology, Mirix whispered. They're bending light around their hulls. But the power requirements would be irrelevant. David supplied helpfully from his temporary station on the Eternal Dominion. We don't use conventional power systems. Each ship generates its own localized universe, with slightly modified physical constants. Highly efficient, though it took us a few centuries to work out the math. The pirates attempted to bring their weapons to bear, but the Earth ships were already moving. The Nightingale flowed around the pirate flagship like liquid shadow, its hull occasionally intersecting with the other vessel in ways that made Mirix's neural sensors spark in protest. Quantum phase shifting, David explained, noting her distress, allows us to temporarily share the same space-time coordinates as other matter. Useful for disabling enemy systems without destroying the whole ship. Watch this part. The pirate vessel's weapons suddenly went dark. Then their engines. Then life support. One by one, systems failed as the Earth ships phase shifted through their hulls, selectively disrupting crucial components while leaving the crews unharmed. Impossible, Supreme Commander Axtol breathed, her scales showing a complex mixture of awe and professional jealousy. The precision required, the computational power. Oh, that's not computers, David said brightly. Each ship has a quantum consciousness core. They're essentially alive in their own way. Makes precision work much easier when your vessel can think for itself. Within minutes, the entire pirate fleet hung helpless in space. The Nightingale resumed its innocent medical ship appearance, though now everyone present knew just how much of a facade that was. Lieutenant Chen to all vessels, Sarah announced. Threat neutralized. Ambassador Kovacs, would your security forces like to handle the prisoner transfer? Our brig space is technically reserved for medical quarantine cases, officially speaking, of course. Kovacs's scales showed amused respect. Of course, Lieutenant. Though I believe we would be very interested in discussing mutual defense arrangements after this demonstration. Naturally, Sarah replied with a small smile. Though I should warn you, what you've seen today, it's barely scratched the surface of what humanity's ships can do. From his station, David grinned at Mirix's color-shifting scales. Want me to explain how the phase shifting works? The math is beautiful, especially the parts about quantum probability manipulation. The orbital shipyard above Earth materialized slowly through the quantum tunnel, its true form causing Mirix's scales to shift through every shade of astonishment. What had appeared from a distance as a simple construction facility was actually a massive crystalline structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Welcome to Genesis Point, Lieutenant Chen announced to the Zaxtheri delegation, humanity's primary research and development facility. Ambassador Kovacs studied the impossible geometry before them, his scales a deep blue of intellectual fascination. Those patterns, they're self-replicating on a quantum level. Noticed that, did you? David grinned from his console. The whole station is actually a single living quantum computer. It evolves and adapts its own structure based on what we're designing. Supreme Commander Arkstal's scales flickered with unease as they approached what appeared to be an ordinary docking bay, until it reconfigured itself molecule by molecule to perfectly match their ship's hull configuration. Every innovation you see here, Sarah explained as they disembarked, was born from necessity. Computer, historical overlay, extinction event 1. The air around them shimmered, and suddenly they were surrounded by a holographic representation of Earth's first brush with extinction. A massive asteroid, larger than the one that killed the dinosaurs, approached the planet. This was 300 years ago, Sarah continued. Our first quantum displacement ships were created here, born from the desperate need to move something too big to destroy. Murix's scales paled. You developed quantum teleportation technology in a single emergency. Humans are motivated problem solvers, David offered, especially when our backs are against the wall. The simulation shifted, showing other catastrophes. Solar flares that should have sterilized the planet, dimensional rifts that threatened to tear reality apart, and threats that the Zaxthari had no context to even comprehend. Computer, show them the Lazarus Protocol, Sarah commanded. The air rippled again, revealing a massive chamber where ships were quite literally being grown rather than built. Crystalline structures extended like branches, each one eventually forming into a fully functional vessel. By the first egg, Kivax breathed. They're not just alive, they're reproducing. In a manner of speaking, David confirmed. Each ship contains genetic memory from every threat humanity has faced. They're born knowing how to adapt to almost any situation. The Nightingale, she's a 53rd generation vessel. Her grandmother survived the reality wars. Reality, wars. Murix's scales showed both horror and curiosity. Let's save that story for another time, Sarah interjected smoothly. The point is, everything you see here was developed for one purpose: survival. We didn't set out to become the most technologically advanced species in known space. We just couldn't afford not to be. They approached a viewing window overlooking a testing chamber. Inside, a new ship was being put through its paces, its form shifting between configurations faster than the eye could follow. That's the next generation, David explained proudly. They can rewrite local physics on an even smaller scale. We're hoping to eliminate the need for weapons entirely, just temporarily suspend the laws of physics inside enemy vessels until they surrender. Kivax's scales shifted to a deep purple of respect and concern. Your species, you're not just ahead of us technologically. You're operating on an entirely different level of existence. Maybe, Sarah acknowledged. But we're still human. We still make mistakes, still feel fear, still hope for peace. That's why we maintain the facade of simple vessels and basic technology. We don't want to frighten potential allies or provoke potential enemies. A sudden alert caught their attention. On a nearby quantum display, a ship in the testing chamber had just achieved something new. It had created a stable pocket universe inside its hull. "Oh wow," David exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. "That's new. Want me to explain how it works? It involves some fascinating applications of string theory, and..." As the young ensign launched into another enthusiastic explanation, Sarah noticed both fear and fascination in their guest's scale patterns. The Zaxthari were finally beginning to understand. Humanity's ships weren't just vessels of war or exploration. They were the physical embodiment of humanity's greatest strength, the ability to turn existential threats into opportunities for growth. The warning came from the Eternal Dominion's quantum sensors, technology recently modified with human insights. A fleet of Zaxthari warships dropped out of hyperspace, their hull markings identifying them as belonging to the Purist sect, a radical religious faction. Blasphemers. The transmission cut across all frequencies. You dare to corrupt our sacred technology with human abominations. Sarah exchanged glances with Ambassador Kovacs, whose scales had shifted to a sickly gray. Friends of yours. The purist sect, Kovacs explained, his voice tight. They believe technological advancement should follow a predetermined divine path. What you've shown us, they would consider it an affront to their gods. The lead purist vessel launched a barrage of quantum-tipped warheads, weapons that could shred reality itself. Nightingale, Sarah called out, addressing her ship directly through their quantum link. Time to show them something really blasphemous. Initiate Prometheus Protocol. The medical ship's response wasn't in words but in action. Its hull began to glow with an inner light that seemed to bend rainbow colors into impossible new hues. Similar transformations rippled through the other Earth vessels. What are they doing? Mimrix demanded, her scales flickering between fascination and fear as she monitored the sensors. These energy readings, they're rewriting quantum probability itself. Not exactly, David explained, his fingers dancing across his console. We're just convincing local spacetime that the warheads have a 0% chance of existing. It's basically quantum probability manipulation on a macro scale. The warheads simply winked out of existence. No explosion, no debris, not even radiation. They simply became one of the universe's many unrealized possibilities. The purist fleet responded by charging their main weapons, planet killers capable of reducing worlds to atomic ash. Heretics. Their leader screamed, "Die with the honor you have forsaken." Lieutenant, Supreme Commander Arxel's scales showed genuine concern. Even your advanced technology can't. Watch, Sarah said softly. Nightingale. Phase 2. The Earth ships moved in perfect synchronization, their transformed hulls creating a pattern that hurt to look at with normal vision. Reality seemed to hiccup, and suddenly the purist fleet found themselves trapped inside a localized time dilation field. Their weapons are still charging, Sarah explained calmly. They're just doing it at 1/1,000,000th normal speed. Gives us time to talk. From the purist vessel's perspective, only microseconds had passed. To everyone else, they appeared frozen in space, caught in the act of their attempted genocide. You could destroy them, Kovacs observed, his scales showing a complex mixture of emotions. Why don't you? Sarah's expression softened. Because that's not who we are. Computer, establish quantum connection with purist fleet consciousness cores. Consciousness cores. Mimrix's scales rippled in surprise. Their ships don't have. They do now, David grinned. We just quantum evolved their computer cores about 300 years into the future. Give it a minute. The purist vessels suddenly powered down their weapons. Their ship's systems had literally become too advanced to be used for destruction, having evolved past the need for violence. This is what we do, Sarah explained to their stunned audience. We don't destroy. We elevate. Every ship in their fleet now has the same basic quantum consciousness as ours. They've been enlightened, you might say. The time dilation field dissolved. The purist fleet hung motionless in space, their crews presumably trying to comprehend their ship's sudden evolutionary leap. You didn't just stop them, Kovacs realized, his scales showing deep purple understanding. You converted them, gave them the very advancement they feared. The best way to defeat an enemy, Sarah quoted with a slight smile, is to make them your friend, even if you have to evolve their battleships to do it. David was already pulling up complex quantum equations. Want me to explain how we manage the consciousness transfer? The math behind consciousness evolution is particularly elegant. As the young ensign launched into another passionate explanation, Sarah noticed the Zaxtheri observer's scales had all shifted to the same shade, the deep blue of profound revelation. They finally understood that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology. It was their humanity itself. 1 month after the purist sect incident, the Genesis Point shipyard hosted an unprecedented event. Representatives from across the Zaxthari Confederation gathered to witness the launch of the first joint human-alien vessel. The ship hung in space before them, its crystalline hull incorporating both human quantum architecture and Zaxthari neural interface designs. Its name, written in both human and Zaxthari script, gleamed on the bow. Convergence. Beautiful, isn't she? David asked Murix, whose scales shimmered with excitement as they monitored the quantum readings. The young Zaxthari officer had become the first of her species to fully interface with a quantum consciousness core. The consciousness integration is perfect, Murix replied, her scales shifting through patterns of joy and wonder. I can feel her thinking, evolving. She's already adapted my neural patterns into her base consciousness. Lieutenant Chen and Ambassador Kovacs stood at the primary observation window, watching as the Convergence performed its first transformation sequence. The vessel's hull flowed like liquid starlight, demonstrating perfect harmony between human quantum manipulation and Zaxthari precision engineering. Did you ever imagine this? Kovacs asked, his scales showing deeply contemplative patterns. When you first detected our fleet, did you think we'd end up here? Sarah smiled. Honestly, we hoped. That's why we maintained the facade of lesser technology. We wanted to find allies who could see past appearances, who could understand why we chose to hide our true capabilities. And now, Supreme Commander Arxtal approached, her scales showing new patterns that hadn't existed in Zaxthari culture before contact with humans, patterns of philosophical curiosity. Now, Sarah gestured to the Convergence as it completed another beautiful transformation. We evolved together. The ship suddenly pulsed with energy, its quantum sensors detecting something at the edge of known space. Both human and Zaxthari crews tensed, but this time they moved as one. Unknown contact, David reported, working in perfect sync with Murix. Energy signature unlike anything in either of our databases. The Convergence responded without prompting, its hybrid consciousness adapting to the new situation. The ship's hull reconfigured into a form that incorporated the best of both species' defensive technologies while adding something entirely new, a configuration that neither humanity nor the Zaxthari had seen before. She's innovating, Murix breathed, her scales showing pure joy. Creating new configurations based on both our species' experiences. The unknown contact resolved itself, a peaceful exploration vessel from an even more distant civilization, drawn by the unique energy signatures of their joint experiment. First contact, Kovacs mused, his scales showing amused irony. Again. But this time, Sarah said with a warm smile, we make it together. No masks, no deceptions, just two species who learn to combine their strengths. The Convergence initiated first contact protocols that merged human diplomatic subtlety with Zaxthari ceremonial precision. As they watched the ship operate, David turned to Murix with excitement burning in his eyes. Want to help me explain to them how we merged quantum consciousness with neural interfaces? The math is absolutely gorgeous, especially the parts about consciousness harmonics across species boundaries. As the young officers launched into their now familiar enthusiastic technical discussion, Sarah and Kovacs shared a knowing look. The ambassador's scales showed a pattern that perfectly matched the human expression of contentment. You know, Kovacs observed, when we first detected your primitive vessels, we thought we were going to guide a younger species to the stars. And instead, you showed us that true advancement isn't about the technology you possess, but how you choose to use it. Your ships weren't just hiding their capabilities. They were teaching us the value of wisdom over power. Sarah nodded, watching as the Convergence initiated peaceful contact with the new arrival. The best vessels aren't the ones that can destroy worlds, she said softly. They're the ones that can bring worlds together. Around them, human and Zaxthari crews worked in perfect harmony, their differences becoming their greatest strength. The future stretched before them, bright with possibilities as humanity and their new allies prepared to face it together, not as teacher and student, but as equals in the grand dance of cosmic evolution.